From the dawn of history, humanity has always been haunted by a single question. Are we truly the first civilization? Scattered across the planet stand monuments so vast and enigmatic they defy the imagination. Egypt's pyramids, the massive stone walls of Sacsayhuamán in Peru, the towering statues of Easter Island. They seem to whisper of technologies long vanished, of knowledge far beyond what primitive societies were supposed to possess. Buried beneath centuries of dust, we uncover clues that should not exist. The Piri Reis map, tracing the coastline of Antarctica centuries before it was officially discovered, or the Antikythera mechanism, a bronze device over 2,000 years old, functioning like a celestial computer. Could there have been advanced civilizations that rose and fell long before our own, swept away by cataclysms and the shifting face of the earth? If so, what fragments did they leave behind for us? What messages etched in stone? What echoes hidden in temples? What riddles preserved in crumbling ruins? This journey is not about final answers, but about opening doors to deeper questions, about listening to the forgotten voices of time. So lean back, close your eyes, and step into the mystery. Welcome to historic sleep. If you're drawn to stories like these, the ones that live in the shadows between what we see and what was made to disappear, feel free to like and subscribe only if it feels right, and let me know in the comments where are you watching from and what time is it for you right now. I love seeing our little map of watchers light up around the world. The journey into the shadows of forgotten history often begins with a single object that should not exist. In dusty archives and museum cases, in fragments pulled from the earth or passed down in yellowed manuscripts, there are things that whisper of knowledge out of place, as if the hands that shaped them belonged to minds far ahead of their time. One such riddle lies in a faded map drawn in 1513 by the Ottoman admiral Piri Reis. To the scholars of his century, it was simply a chart for navigating the known seas, etched with coastlines and inscriptions. But when modern eyes laid it beside satellite photographs, they noticed something impossible. Beneath the curling ink lines appeared the outline of Antarctica, not as it is now beneath ice sheets miles thick, but as it might have been when its shores were free of glaciers. The detail was uncanny, the placement precise. Yet Antarctica was not even discovered until 300 years later. How could a man of the 16th century have charted lands buried for millennia? Some argued he must have copied older sources, relics of sailors whose existence has long since vanished, fragments of a cartographic tradition belonging to a civilization that watched the poles before the world froze. Not far from the Mediterranean where that map was inked, divers centuries later dredged up another enigma from the depths. In 1901, off the Greek island of Antikythera, fishermen searching for sponges stumbled on the rusted remains of a Roman shipwreck. Among the statues and amphorae lay a corroded lump of bronze gears fused together by time. When cleaned, the fragments revealed wheels within wheels, teeth precisely cut, inscriptions marking zodiac signs and planetary cycles. It was not simply a decorative object, it was a machine, an ancient computer built more than 2,000 years ago to predict eclipses, track the motions of the sun, the moon, and the wandering stars. Scholars today call it the Antikythera mechanism, but the name does little to soften its strangeness. No other device of such sophistication would appear again until the geared clocks of medieval Europe, more than a millennium later. Who taught the craftsmen of ancient Greece to carve gears so small, so exact, that they could model the heavens in bronze? Some suggest it was the genius of one workshop, knowledge that vanished with its makers. Others see in it the faint echo of a science older than Greece, preserved in secrecy and passed like a spark until it flickered out. Such objects stand like cracks in the mirror of history. The Piri Reis map, the Antikythera mechanism, each seems to look backward toward a deeper past, toward people whose minds we struggle to imagine. And they are not alone. Across continents, fragments surface that feel like messages from another age. At Sacsayhuamán in Peru, massive stones lock together so tightly that not even a blade of grass can slip between them. The edges are cut with a precision that mocks the tools of the Inca, as if some forgotten technique had once been common knowledge. In Egypt, the granite boxes of Saqqara bear surfaces so smooth they appear machined, polished as though with drills harder than the stone itself. Ancient legends speak of lost books of knowledge, of architects guided by gods, of secrets kept in temples and sealed away when floods and fire swept the earth. It is tempting to explain each puzzle in isolation, to imagine coincidence or lost skill, or even exaggeration. But when you gather them side by side, a pattern begins to emerge, faint yet undeniable. Across the world, separated by oceans and centuries, humans created things that should have been beyond their reach. Maps drawn with data no sailor of the age could have gathered. Machines more complex than the gears of their descendants. Stones carved as though weightless, placed as though by invisible hands. Either our ancestors were far more capable than the textbooks allow, or they inherited shards of wisdom from somewhere older still. What does it mean to hold such a shard in your hand? Imagine a scholar unrolling Piri Reis's map and realizing the lines matched the shape of a frozen continent. Imagine turning the corroded gears of Antikythera, feeling the resistance of bronze teeth still aligned after 2,000 years, the heavens turning under your fingers. These are not mere curiosities. They are voices, faint but insistent, saying, "Remember us." They remind us that history is not a straight road, but a labyrinth, with corridors that loop back into darkness, chambers filled with echoes we barely understand. Perhaps the most haunting thought is this: if such wonders survived by accident, a map preserved in a palace, a machine hidden in a wreck, what was lost that we will never see? How many libraries burned? How many inventions sank to the bottom of seas? How many monuments now lie beneath jungles or deserts? We are left with fragments, tantalizing enough to make us question, but too incomplete to confirm. And so we walk on, piecing together the mosaic of forgotten civilizations from the shards time allows us. Each discovery forces us to widen the horizon of what we think we know, to imagine that the human story is not one of steady ascent, but of rises and falls, of brilliance born and buried, of flames that lit the night, and then were extinguished. As we move deeper into this exploration, keep in mind that these mysteries are not simply about the past. They are about us, our hunger to understand, our fear of forgetting, our fragile grip on knowledge in a world where fire and flood can erase centuries in an instant. The lost technologies are not just relics, they are mirrors, showing us both what we have achieved and how easily it can all slip away. And so the journey continues, into pyramids, temples, ruins and legends chasing the memory of civilizations that time tried to silence, but whose whispers still reach us through stone, metal, and ink. The desert of Egypt holds its breath around structures that have stood longer than most empires. Rising from the sands like mountains of geometry, the pyramids are both familiar and unfathomable. Everyone has seen their triangular silhouettes, yet the closer you come, the more impossible they appear. Each block weighs tons, yet they are stacked by the millions, fitted with such precision that centuries of storms cannot drive a knife blade between them. At Giza, the Great Pyramid looms above the plateau, its base aligned almost perfectly with the cardinal points of the compass. How, we ask, could people more than 4,000 years ago have created something so exact, with no iron tools, no cranes, no modern engineering? The standard story is that armies of laborers dragged stones across the sand, pulling them up ramps with sweat and ropes. But standing at the base of the Great Pyramid, staring at its immensity, that explanation feels thin, like trying to lift the weight of the structure with words alone. Legends of Egypt tell another tale. Some whispered that the pyramids were not tombs at all, but machines of the gods. In texts left by Arab chroniclers, stories appear of chambers filled with knowledge, of treasures sealed against the coming flood. Others suggest they were built not to honor death, but to harness the forces of life. Water channels beneath the plateau hint at hydraulics, as if the builders knew how to draw energy from the pressure of the Nile. Within the granite chambers, acoustics ripple in ways that make the walls hum, leading some to imagine the pyramids as resonant instruments tuned to the earth itself. To stand in the king's chamber, feeling the deep vibration when a low tone is sung, is to wonder whether this space was designed as more than a tomb. It feels like a chamber for transformation, for rituals where sound and stone conspired to alter the mind and spirit. Then there are the stars. The shafts cut into the pyramid align with Orion's belt and the pole star of the age, as if the builders wanted the heavens themselves to breathe through their monument. To ancient Egyptians, Orion was Osiris, the god of rebirth, and Sirius was the star of the goddess Isis. The pyramid's alignments suggest not random chance, but a deliberate marriage of architecture and cosmology, a stone model of the sky on Earth. Some researchers even suggest the three great pyramids mirror the pattern of Orion's belt, laid out on the desert floor as a map of heaven. Did the pharaohs order this to eternalize their souls among the stars, or were they preserving an older tradition, inherited from a forgotten age when sky watchers understood the rhythm of the cosmos in ways we barely grasp today? Inside the medical papyri of Egypt, like the Ebers papyrus, we find anatomical notes and prescriptions, knowledge that seems advanced for its time. They knew of the pulse, of surgical techniques, of plants that could numb pain. Combined with the mathematics that guided their construction, the use of pi and the golden ratio embedded in the pyramid's dimensions, it is clear that Egypt was no stranger to sophisticated science. But the pyramids go beyond science as we define it. They blur the line between temple, observatory, and engine, suggesting a world view where the sacred and the technical were one. Theories abound, and each reflects the mystery's depth. Some say the pyramids were giant energy devices, drawing power from the Earth's electromagnetic field transmitting it through their quartz-lined passages. Others imagine them as great pumps, channeling water in a system that could irrigate fields or supply the city. There are even those who see them as beacons, symbols to beings beyond the earth, a communication etched in stone for the cosmos to witness. Most mainstream historians remain cautious, preferring the simpler narrative of pharaohs and funerary cults. Yet even within that frame, the precision, scale, and durability of the pyramids remain unmatched. We have built towers that scrape the sky, but none that have lasted with such defiance against time. Walking the plateau at dusk, when the sun dips behind the desert and shadows stretch across the sand, the pyramids take on another face. They seem less like buildings and more like survivors, witnesses to ages we can barely imagine. They have seen empires rise and fall, armies march, prophets speak, cities crumble into dust. Their stones have absorbed the footsteps of millions, from ancient priests to modern tourists. And through it all they remain, enigmas carved into the horizon, their silence heavier than their mass. What do the pyramids truly guard? If they were tombs, their treasures are gone, stolen long ago. If they were machines, their purpose has been lost. If they were symbols, the meaning has faded with the language of their builders. Yet, perhaps that is their secret, that they were meant to outlast knowledge itself, to stand as reminders that human ambition reaches for eternity, even as memory fails. They embody the paradox of civilization. We build to last forever, but time erodes everything except the mystery. When you touch the stone of the Great Pyramid, rough and cool beneath your palm, you are touching not just limestone, but the edge of an ancient mind. You are pressing your hand against a problem unsolved, against a story half told. The pyramids do not give answers. They generate questions, the way the desert generates mirages. They force us to confront the possibility that the past was not simpler, but stranger, and that in some ways it may have been wiser. And as the night falls, and Orion rises over the plateau, you realize you are standing in the same place where countless eyes once looked up, believing the stars and the stones were connected, that the earth itself could speak to the heavens. The sands shift, the winds howl, but the pyramids endure, silent riddles waiting for us to listen. And so we move deeper into the labyrinth of lost civilizations, following the faint thread of their knowledge, hoping to catch a glimpse of what the ancients knew and why they left their secrets in stone. Across the world lie stones so vast they seem to defy the strength of human hands. At first glance they look like cliffs broken by nature, scattered boulders weathered by time. But step closer, and you realize they are not accidents of geology. They are walls, platforms, temples, each block carved, lifted, and placed with purpose. The question rises like a shadow. How did people without iron tools, without engines, without steel cables, move mountains into place? In the highlands of Peru, the fortress of Sacsayhuamán stands as one of the clearest riddles. Towering zigzag walls stretch across the plateau, each stone larger than a truck, some weighing more than 100 tons. Yet they lock together with no mortar, each curve fitting its neighbor so precisely that 4 centuries of earthquakes have failed to shift them. Spanish chroniclers, awed by what they saw, wrote that the stones seemed to have been softened, molded like clay, before hardening again. Local legends whispered that the builders summoned forces unknown, a technology now lost to time. To walk along those walls is to feel the weight of mystery pressing down, for no explanation feels sufficient. Ropes and ramps, levers and manpower, they are the tools we assign, but imagining them lifting such stones over steep terrain strains belief. Half a world away, in Lebanon, the ruins of Baalbek guard stones even larger. The so-called trilithon, 3 blocks each over 800 tons, rest beneath the Temple of Jupiter. Nearby lies an unfinished stone still rooted in its quarry, weighing more than 1,000 tons, the size of a small ship. How could ancient builders have moved such a mass, let alone lifted it into place? Engineers today debate whether even modern cranes could achieve such feats. Some suggest rollers of wood, but where would a forest large enough to supply them exist in the treeless plains of the region? Others propose sledges dragged across lubricated tracks, or stones floated on barges. Yet every theory collapses beneath the sheer scale, leaving us staring at the impossible with awe and silence. The enigma is not confined to the Old World. In the Pacific, the island of Rapa Nui, Easter Island, hosts the Moai, statues that rise from the earth with long faces and solemn eyes, some standing 30 feet tall. Carved from volcanic tuff, they were transported miles from the quarry to the coastlines, where they gaze out at the horizon. The local people speak of the statues walking, of spiritual energy called mana that moved them across the island. Modern experiments show that with careful ropes and rocking motions, small teams can indeed make a statue walk forward. But the scale of the achievement remains staggering, especially for a society with few resources, isolated by thousands of miles of ocean. Then there is Stonehenge in the fields of England. The great sarsen stones weigh up to 25 tons, and some were transported from quarries nearly 200 miles away. Dragged over hills, floated on rivers, lifted upright in circles aligned with the solstices, they stand as both monument and mystery. To those who built it, each stone was more than weight. It was part of a cosmic design, a union of earth and sky. But the physical question lingers. What knowledge of leverage, of balance, of patience allowed them to carry out the task? What links all these sites is not simply the mass of stone, but the vision behind it. These were not desperate projects. They were deliberate, immense undertakings requiring coordination, planning, and skill. They hint at societies capable of mobilizing thousands, at leaders able to command decades of labor. And yet, even with such manpower, the precision suggests something more than brute force. At Sacsayhuamán, the joints are not straight but serpentine, carved to interlock like puzzle pieces, ensuring stability in earthquakes. At Baalbek, the foundation stones form a platform so level that later Roman temples could rise upon it without adjustment. At Stonehenge, the lintels are shaped with mortise and tenon joints, carpentry techniques scaled up to megalithic size. These details whisper of engineers who understood principles we still respect: stability, balance, durability. Perhaps what is most haunting is not just how the stones were moved, but why. What drove these societies to invest so much in shaping rock on such a scale? Were they building fortresses, temples, calendars? Were they enacting myths in stone, anchoring their world to the cosmos? Or were they echoing something even older, replicating a knowledge passed down from forgotten ancestors? Each culture tells its own story, yet the stones themselves tell another. A story of ambition reaching beyond practical needs, of humans striving to inscribe permanence into a world of impermanence. Standing before these megaliths, you sense their dual nature. They are evidence of extraordinary human determination, but they also feel like messages from a time when the boundary between myth and engineering was thinner. The legends of softening stone, of singing blocks into motion, of statues walking, these may be metaphors, or they may hint at practices lost to memory. To dismiss them outright is to silence the voices of the past. To accept them literally is to wander into mystery. Either way, they remind us that history is not only written in texts, but carved in weight and silence. As the sun sets on Sacsayhuamán, shadows stretch across the zigzag walls, and the stones glow with a fire that seems alive. At Baalbek, the unfinished monolith still lies half buried in its quarry, as if waiting for hands strong enough to lift it. On Rapa Nui, the Moai continue their eternal vigil, staring out to seas that carried their makers long ago. And at Stonehenge, the solstice light still passes through ancient gates of stone, marking time for a people who vanished, but whose work endures. These monuments are not answers. They are questions cast in rock. They invite us to reconsider what our ancestors knew, to imagine that the story of civilization is less about steady progress and more about cycles of knowledge gained and lost. They challenge us to look at our own achievements and wonder, if our cities were to fall, what stones would we leave behind to puzzle those who come after? The mystery of moving stones is not only about the past, it is about the resilience of human vision, the will to shape the world, and the silence that follows when the details are forgotten. Long before explorers charted the oceans, a philosopher in Athens wrote of a land that had already slipped beneath the waves. In his dialogues, Plato spoke of Atlantis, an island kingdom beyond the Pillars of Hercules, larger than Libya and Asia combined, a place of extraordinary wealth and knowledge. He described it not as a myth, but as history passed down through Egyptian priests, a warning wrapped in story. Atlantis, he said, was powerful, advanced, radiant with temples plated in precious metals and harbors filled with ships. Yet in a single day and night of misfortune, the island sank, swallowed by the sea. For centuries, his words have echoed across the imagination of the world. Atlantis is more than a tale of a city lost. It is the idea of a civilization that reached heights of knowledge before falling into ruin, a mirror of human ambition and fragility. Some picture its streets paved with orichalcum, a mysterious metal brighter than bronze. Others imagine crystal towers humming with energy, or engines that could draw power from the earth and stars. Legends hint that its people could command the weather, channel the forces of nature, even harness the sea itself. To skeptics, these are fantasies. But to those who listen with curiosity, they may be fragments of memory, distorted by time, but not entirely invented. The question is not only where Atlantis was, but what it represented. Some place it in the Atlantic Ocean, shattered by volcanic eruption. Others see it in the Mediterranean, pointing to the island of Santorini and the Minoan civilization destroyed by fire and wave. Still others trace it to the Caribbean, the Azores, even Antarctica beneath its ice. The search has been endless, but the certainty remains elusive. Perhaps this is why Atlantis endures, not because we know where it was, but because we feel it could have been anywhere. A universal story of rise and fall. Imagine, for a moment, a society that mastered energy in ways we cannot fully explain. Some traditions speak of the Atlanteans using giant crystals as power sources, focusing light and vibration into currents that fueled their cities. Sailors whispered of navigation guided by magnetic stones, fleets that crossed oceans long before Columbus, colonies that spread across the known world. In this vision, Atlantis was not just a city but a hub, linking continents in an age of forgotten exploration. If true, echoes of its influence might linger in the pyramids of Egypt, the temples of Central America, the myths of sunken lands carried by cultures from the Pacific to the Atlantic. And then, disaster. Plato wrote of divine punishment, a flood that devoured Atlantis in a single night. Scientists today consider whether a real cataclysm, a volcanic eruption, a massive earthquake, a tsunami, could have inspired the tale. The eruption of Santorini around 1600 BCE, for example, sent ash and waves across the Aegean, devastating the Minoan world. Such an event could have given birth to the memory of a civilization destroyed at once. Yet the detail in Plato's account, the concentric canals, the grand citadel, the armies that marched against Athens, suggests more than a simple allegory. It suggests a memory of something tangible, retold in the language of philosophy. Whether Atlantis was real or imagined, its meaning is undeniable. It warns of hubris, of societies that grow powerful but forget their limits, that exploit nature until nature strikes back. It also inspires with the dream that we are not the first to touch greatness, that humanity may have risen before, reaching heights only to fall and leave us fragments of their story. That duality is why the myth still burns in our minds. Standing on a shore at sunset, watching the sea stretch into shadow, you can almost believe the waves conceal something more. Beneath the water may lie cities, columns toppled, statues face down in the sand, crystal towers shattered into silence. Perhaps we will never find them. Perhaps Atlantis was never meant to be found, only remembered as a lesson, a symbol of what we risk when our reach exceeds our wisdom. But the yearning to discover it keeps us searching, probing the sea floor, scanning the coastlines, weaving maps of imagination as much as geology. Atlantis may be everywhere and nowhere, a mirror we hold up to ourselves. It may be a memory of a real place or an invention of Plato's genius. But either way, it reveals something deep about us. Our hunger to believe that knowledge is older than we know, that greatness has been achieved before and can be achieved again. Each generation finds in Atlantis what it seeks: warning, inspiration, mystery. And in that way, Atlantis is eternal, not beneath the waves, but within our minds, a legend that refuses to drown. In the vast tapestry of India's ancient epics, there are passages that read less like myth and more like descriptions of technology. Within the verses of the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, among battles of kings and journeys of gods, appear strange vehicles with wings not of feathers but of fire, machines that rose into the heavens and crossed continents in hours. They are called vimanas, and for centuries they have fueled the imagination of those who read them not as allegory, but as memory. The Ramayana tells of Ravana, the demon king of Lanka, who commanded a flying chariot named Pushpaka. It was not a mere cart pulled by horses, but a palace in the sky, described as moving wherever the mind wished, adorned with shining windows, carrying hosts of people across oceans. When Rama, the hero of the epic, defeated Ravana, the Pushpaka Vimana carried him and his companions back to Ayodhya. To those who wrote the tale, it was a gift of the gods. To modern readers, the description is hauntingly close to an aircraft, or perhaps something even more advanced. The Mahabharata goes further, telling of battles where vimanas were used as weapons of war. They are described as soaring machines releasing energy that scorched the earth, beams of light that blinded armies, thunderbolts that shattered cities. Some passages speak of weapons whose effects sound disturbingly like radiation, leaving survivors with hair falling out, water poisoned, land rendered barren. Are these merely poetic exaggerations, the imagination of storytellers describing divine power? Or are they echoes of something else, visions of machines and forces witnessed by ancestors and wrapped in the only language they had? Other texts add to the mystery. The Samarangana Sutradhara, a medieval treatise, devotes chapters to the construction of flying machines. It describes metals that must be used, engines fueled by mercury, designs with multiple tiers that could travel great distances. Scholars often dismiss these writings as symbolic or as later inventions inspired by myth. But for those searching the cracks of history, they are tantalizing, as if technical manuals had been disguised as scripture, preserved not for builders but for memory. Imagine ancient India not as a land of isolated kingdoms, but as a hub of extraordinary knowledge. Its astronomers charted planetary motions with accuracy rivaling modern calculations. Its mathematicians invented the concept of zero and advanced geometry. Could its visionaries also have experimented with flight, constructing prototypes we no longer possess? The possibility is difficult to prove, yet the consistency of descriptions across centuries is striking. The Vimana is not a single tale, but a recurring figure, described with detail too precise to dismiss. Aerial vehicles with domes, propulsion, even sound and light emitted as they moved. There is another way to see them, one that does not rely on machines of metal and fire. In spiritual traditions, the Vimana can be read as a symbol of transcendence, a chariot of the soul that carries humans beyond the earthly realm. To rise in a Vimana was to ascend into higher states of being, to travel between worlds of gods and mortals. In this view, the descriptions of flight, of speed and light, are metaphors for mystical experience, visions of yogis and sages expressed in poetic form. Both interpretations, the technological and the spiritual, reveal something profound about the texts. They point to a humanity reaching for the sky, whether through machines or through meditation. Standing in the ruins of ancient Indian cities, you see carvings of beings riding strange vehicles, celestial craft etched in stone. At first they look like stylized temples or thrones, but with the eyes of the epics in mind, they take on new life. Could the artisans have been depicting not myth but memory, not dreams but reflections of something seen? The question lingers in the silence of the stones. The idea of vimanas has traveled far beyond India. In the 19th and 20th centuries, as airships and airplanes were invented, readers of Sanskrit texts found eerie parallels. Some speculated that these were not myths at all, but ancient records of encounters with beings from beyond Earth. That what the sages called gods were in fact visitors with craft. This interpretation, controversial and speculative, became a cornerstone of ancient astronaut theories, fueling books and documentaries that tried to connect the vimanas with UFOs reported in the skies today. Yet whether you believe they were machines of metal or metaphors of spirit, the vimanas continue to exert a strange pull. They remind us that the dream of flight is not modern. Long before the Wright brothers, long before rockets rose from launch pads, humans were already telling stories of chariots in the sky, of journeys among the stars, of vehicles that carried mortals into the realm of the divine. These stories reveal a longing as old as humanity itself. To break free of gravity, to rise above the limits of the earth, to see what lies beyond the horizon. Picture the Pushpaka Vimana, gleaming in the sun as it lifts from the palace of Ravana. Picture the great wars of the Mahabharata, machines circling in the sky while armies tremble below. Picture sages writing on palm leaves, describing engines of mercury and metals shining like the sun. Whether these were literal or metaphorical, they carried meaning powerful enough to endure for millennia. And today, when we look to the stars with our own machines, we feel a kinship with those ancient visions. Perhaps we are not the first to dream this dream. Perhaps we are only remembering. On the rolly plains of southern England, where mist clings to the grass and the horizon stretches wide, a circle of stones rises from the earth like the bones of a forgotten giant. Stonehenge is among the most famous monuments on the planet, and yet it remains one of the most mysterious. At first glance, it seems simple, standing stones arranged in a ring, but the deeper you look, the stranger it becomes. The stones are massive, some weighing 25 tons, dragged from quarries miles away. Others, the smaller blue stones, were transported from Wales nearly 200 miles distant. Who moved them? How were they raised upright, capped with lintels balanced like bridges? These questions echo through the site, unanswered. But the greater riddle is why. To walk among the stones is to step into a pattern not random, but deliberate. The outer circle frames the horizon. The inner horseshoe of trilithons points towards the midsummer sunrise. On the longest day of the year, the sun rises directly above the heel-stone, casting its first light down the central axis of the monument. On the winter solstice, the sun sets in perfect alignment with the great arch. These are not accidents of placement. They are the fingerprints of a people who measured the sky, who bound their lives to the rhythm of the heavens. Imagine Stonehenge not as a ruin, but as it once was. A complete circle of stones, some carved with intricate mortise and tenon joints, gleaming against the sky. Picture the gatherings that may have taken place here, priests or shamans chanting as the sun crested the horizon, villagers watching in awe as the light pierced the heart of the circle. Perhaps it was a calendar of stone, tracking the turning of the year for agriculture and ritual alike. Perhaps it was a temple where earth and sky met in ceremony. Or perhaps it was a place of healing, as legends suggest, where waters and stones were believed to cure the sick. The blue stones themselves hint at this healing role. Carried from the Preseli Hills of Wales, they were believed to hold special power, as if their journey imbued them with sacred energy. To transport them such a distance required not only immense labor, but immense faith. What could compel a society without wheels, without beasts of burden, to move stones across rivers and hills? Only the conviction that what they were building, mattered on a cosmic scale. Stonehenge is part of a larger landscape of mystery. Nearby lie burial mounds, cursus monuments, and avenues stretching toward rivers. The site was not isolated, but integrated into a sacred geography, a network of earth and stone through which processions may have flowed. Some archaeologists suggest it was a liminal space, a bridge between life and death, where ceremonies guided the spirits of the dead into the afterlife. Others see it as a place of uniting tribes, where people from across Britain gathered for seasonal feasts, strengthening bonds under the gaze of the stones. Legends cling to the monument like ivy. Medieval tales claimed Merlin, the wizard of Arthurian lore, flew the stones from Ireland with the help of giants. Local folklore spoke of fairies dancing in the ring at night, of stones that walked back to their places, if moved. Such stories, while fantastical, reveal the awe Stonehenge inspired even in ages long after its builders were gone. The monument seemed too large, too precise, to be explained by ordinary means, and so it was attributed to magic. To modern minds, the alignment with the solstices is perhaps the most striking clue. Across cultures, the longest and shortest days of the year were moments of power, when the sun seemed to pause before turning back, when life and death, light and darkness balanced on a knife edge. To anchor such moments in stone was to bring order to the chaos of the cosmos, to give human life a rhythm tied to the stars. Stonehenge may have been, above all, a reminder that humanity is part of a larger dance, one that stretches beyond generations. Standing within the circle at dawn, you feel the chill of the stones, their surfaces rough with lichen, their shadows stretching long. The air is still, and then, slowly, the sun rises, light spilling over the horizon, striking through the frame of ancient gates. In that moment, you glimpse what the builders must have seen: the union of earth and sky, time itself passing through stone. It is an experience that bridges millennia, connecting modern eyes with ancient vision. Yet even with all we know, the full truth eludes us. We cannot say for certain who built Stonehenge, or why it was abandoned, or what songs were sung within its circle. We can only stand in its presence and listen. The stones do not answer, but they resonate. They remind us that there was a time when people raised monuments not to kings or conquest, but to the cosmos, when human life was measured against the turning of the heavens. Stonehenge is both ruin and revelation, a fragment of a world view in which the universe was alive, and humans sought their place within it. As the last rays of sunset fade, the stones stand silent, guardians of a secret older than memory. They endure because they were built not just of rock, but of meaning that still vibrates through time. To walk away is to carry the question with you. Did our ancestors know something we have forgotten? Something about the harmony of earth, stone, and sky? Stonehenge remains their answer, carved not in words, but in silence. On the high plateau of central Mexico, where the air is thin and the mountains guard the horizon, lies a city built on a scale so vast that even in ruins it takes the breath away. Teotihuacan, the place where gods were born, stretches for miles, its avenues wide enough for armies, its pyramids rising like man-made mountains from the valley floor. Long before the Aztecs arrived, this city was already ancient, already abandoned, yet its grandeur was so overwhelming that they believed it could not have been built by mortals. To them, it was the dwelling place of deities, the birthplace of the sun and moon themselves. Walking the Avenue of the Dead, you are flanked by walls of stone and platforms where temples once stood. Ahead looms the Pyramid of the Sun, massive even in its eroded state, its base nearly as large as the Great Pyramid of Giza. To the north, the Pyramid of the Moon mirrors the mountains beyond, its steps climbing toward the sky. These structures align with celestial events, the avenue tilted to mark the setting of the Pleiades and the passage of the sun on certain days of the year. The city was not random. It was a map of heaven laid upon the earth, a grid that mirrored the cosmos. At its height, Teotihuacan may have housed 100,000 people, making it one of the largest cities of the ancient world. Its streets were laid out in strict geometry, neighborhoods divided by walls, workshops humming with activity. Obsidian blades were forged here, traded across Mesoamerica. Murals painted in vivid colors still survive, depicting jaguars, serpents, priests in elaborate headdresses. Beneath the plazas, tunnels and chambers stretch like veins, some filled with mercury pools that shimmered like liquid light. What ceremonies took place there? What rituals unfolded in the depths, beneath the gaze of the pyramids above? Archaeologists search for answers, but Teotihuacan resists. Unlike Egypt or Mesopotamia, it left no clear written records, no king lists or chronicles. We do not even know the names of its rulers. The people who built this city remain faceless, their voices lost. What we have are stones, murals, artifacts, clues without a narrator. And so the city itself becomes the storyteller, its scale speaking of ambition, its alignments whispering of cosmic vision, its silence hinting at secrets still buried. The Aztecs, centuries later, wove the ruins into their mythology. They believed the gods gathered here to create the sun and moon, to set the cycles of time in motion. They walked the Avenue of the Dead not as archaeologists, but as pilgrims, feeling the presence of divinity in every stone. Even today, visitors climb the pyramids at dawn to watch the sun rise, retracing a ritual thousands of years old. Yet beneath the awe lies another question. Why did Teotihuacan fall? Around the 6th century, the city began to decline. Temples were burned, palaces destroyed. Some believe it was an internal revolt, the people turning against the elites who ruled from the pyramids. Others suggest famine or drought, the land unable to sustain such a vast population. Whatever the cause, the city was abandoned, left for the jungle and the wind. By the time the Aztecs arrived, it was already a ruin, its builders forgotten. What strikes the modern visitor is not only the scale of the city, but the sense of purpose embedded in its design. Teotihuacan was not built haphazardly. It was a vision executed in stone, a city meant to embody the order of the universe. The Avenue of the Dead stretched for miles, a processional path guiding pilgrims between pyramids that represented celestial mountains. The Pyramid of the Sun was built over a cave, a portal to the underworld, linking sky and earth through ritual. The Temple of the Feathered Serpent, covered in sculpted serpent heads, speaks of gods of creation, of cycles of life and death. Some scholars see in this city a reflection of power, a society organized to control labor and resources on a massive scale. Others see something more, a civilization that viewed itself not merely as human, but as part of the cosmic order, aligning its very streets with the stars. Perhaps both are true, for power and vision often walk together. Teotihuacan endures not only as stone, but as symbol, proof that humans can build cities that aspire to eternity. Stand atop the Pyramid of the Sun at dusk, when the valley glows red and the shadows lengthen across the avenue. The wind carries whispers of rituals long ended, of drums and flutes, of fires burning in the plazas. Below you stretch the ruins of a city that once rivaled Rome and Beijing, a city that needed no written word to make its voice heard. Teotihuacan speaks through its scale, its silence, its endurance. It reminds us that civilizations rise not only from necessity but from vision, that the stones of the past are not dead, but alive with the dreams of those who placed them. The city of the gods still stands, though its people are gone. Its pyramids remain as mountains of memory, telling us that humanity has always sought to bridge earth and sky, to make the cosmos part of daily life. Teotihuacan's story is unfinished, waiting in the tunnels, the murals, the mercury that gleams in the dark. Perhaps one day more secrets will surface. Until then, we walk its avenues, humbled, reminded that even forgotten civilizations once shaped the world on a scale we struggle to match. Deep in the jungles of Central America, beneath canopies alive with howler monkeys and the buzz of cicadas, rise the remnants of temples and palaces swallowed by green. These are the cities of the Maya, a civilization that flourished for centuries in the forests of Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, and Honduras. To step into their ruins is to walk into a paradox, a society that lived amid dense wilderness, yet mapped the heavens with uncanny precision, a people whose cities were abandoned long before European contact, leaving behind a legacy both dazzling and haunting. At sites like Tikal, Palenque, and Chichen Itza, massive pyramids pierce the treetops, stairways climb skyward in defiance of gravity. Carvings depict kings in elaborate regalia, gods with serpent headdresses, glyphs arranged in complex patterns across stelae. For centuries, these glyphs resisted understanding, dismissed as mere decoration. But when scholars began to unlock them, a new picture emerged. The Maya had a written language as intricate as any of the ancient world, capable of recording history, astronomy, poetry. They were not a simple jungle people. They were chroniclers of time itself. The Maya calendar is perhaps their most famous gift. It was not one calendar, but several, interlocking like gears. The 260-day ritual calendar, the 365-day solar calendar, and the long count that stretched across millennia. To the Maya, time was not a straight line, but a cycle, endlessly turning, days repeating with sacred resonance. They tracked eclipses, solstices, planetary conjunctions with precision rivaling modern astronomy. At Chichen Itza, the Pyramid of Kukulkan reveals this mastery. On the equinox, the setting sun casts shadows along the stairway that resemble a serpent descending, a cosmic drama carved into stone. This was not coincidence. It was design, architecture as astronomy, ritual as mathematics. The accuracy of their observations is staggering. With no telescopes, they could predict solar eclipses centuries in advance. They calculated the cycle of Venus to within a fraction of a day, understanding its significance as both morning star and evening star. Venus was not just a planet to them, but a deity, a force influencing war and sacrifice. Battles were sometimes timed to its appearances, decisions of kings tied to the rhythm of the sky. To live as a Maya was to inhabit a universe alive with patterns, where heaven and earth moved in harmony. But the Maya were not only astronomers, they were engineers of the jungle. In cities like Copan and Caracol, they built reservoirs and canals, controlling water in a land prone to drought. They carved terraces into hillsides to farm maize, beans, squash, sustaining dense populations in an environment often hostile. Their artistry flourished in stucco masks, painted murals, jade ornaments shimmering like captured light. Their ball courts hosted ritual games where leather balls bounced off stone walls, the outcome sometimes carrying the weight of sacrifice. Every detail of their lives was infused with cosmology, each city laid out as a model of the universe. And yet, for all their brilliance, the Maya world collapsed. Around the 9th century, great cities in the southern lowlands were abandoned. Temples fell silent, plazas empty, the jungle reclaiming what human hands had made. Scholars debate the reasons: overpopulation, warfare, prolonged drought. Perhaps it was a convergence of factors, a fragile balance tipping until the system could no longer sustain itself. The Maya did not vanish entirely. Their descendants live on today, languages and traditions enduring. But the grandeur of their cities, the scale of their achievements, slipped into silence, leaving behind questions as dense as the forests that cover them. Imagine standing atop Temple 4 at Tikal, looking out across the canopy as dawn breaks. Mist clings to the trees, and the cries of birds echo in the distance. In that moment, you see what the ancient Maya saw: the world as a living cosmos, every movement of the sky reflected in stone, every stone infused with spirit. You understand that their genius was not only in numbers and stars, but in weaving those into daily life, making the universe tangible. The Maya challenge us with their paradox. They show us a people who achieved remarkable sophistication, yet could not prevent collapse. They remind us that knowledge alone is not enough. Societies must balance knowledge with resilience. Their cities whisper that brilliance can flourish in unlikely places, but also that brilliance can fade, leaving ruins where once there was splendor. Even today, their calendar stirs fascination. In 2012, misinterpretations of the long count fueled apocalyptic fears, as if the Maya had predicted the end of the world. But to them, the turning of the calendar was not an ending, but a renewal, a cycle reborn. Perhaps that is the truest lesson of the Maya, that time is not destruction but continuity, that even when cities fall, memory endures. Walking through Chichen Itza at sunset, you see tourists gathered around the pyramid, watching the shadow serpent descend. They cheer, snap photos, marvel. They may not know the glyphs, the rituals, the gods, but they feel what the Maya intended: awe at the unity of earth and sky. The stones still speak, even after centuries of silence. And in that whisper we hear the Maya reminding us that we, too, are part of cycles larger than ourselves, that knowledge is not only for power, but for meaning. The jungle may have hidden their cities, but it did not erase their vision. The Maya endure in their language, in their descendants, in the precision of their calendars, and the alignment of their pyramids. They endure in the way we still look up at the stars and wonder. Their story is not only one of rise and fall, it is one of continuity, of humanity's eternal dance with time. High in the thin air of the Andes, where clouds drift at eye level and mountains cut the sky into jagged peaks, the Inca carved their world out of stone and soil. From their capital at Cusco, their empire stretched along the spine of South America, binding together deserts, jungles, and snow-capped summits. To walk the remnants of their highways today is to step into the mind of a civilization that saw no obstacle too great. Not mountains, not rivers, not even the very shape of the land. The Inca did not invent the wheel, nor did they know iron or steel. Yet their achievements in engineering remain some of the most astonishing in history. Across the Andes, they built a network of roads and suspension bridges stretching more than 20,000 miles, tying together distant valleys and cities. These roads climbed sheer cliffs, crossed raging rivers, threaded through passes where the air thins and breath comes hard. Along them ran chasqui, relay runners carrying messages on foot, passing information faster than horses might gallop across the plains. In a world without writing, they recorded data with quipus, bundles of knotted cords whose colors and positions encoded information, a tactile mathematics that carried the empire's memory. Their architecture was equally brilliant. At Machu Picchu, stone walls rise from terraces cut into the mountainside, each block fitted with such precision that no mortar was needed. Earthquakes that topple modern buildings barely shift these walls, their stones leaning and locking with a resilience born of careful design. Cusco itself was shaped like a puma, its streets and temples forming the outline of a sacred animal, a city as symbol as much as settlement. The Inca did not simply build, they harmonized construction with the land, blending function with meaning. Agriculture sustained their empire, and here too, the Inca mastered the mountains. They carved terraces into steep slopes, controlling erosion while expanding farmland. Irrigation channels brought water from high springs to crops below, distributing it with mathematical precision. In Moray, concentric terraces form a giant amphitheater in the earth, each level creating a microclimate, allowing crops to be tested across varying conditions. It was, in essence, an experimental laboratory, a place where the Inca studied how plants could adapt, ensuring food security for millions. Gold and silver adorned their temples, not for wealth, but for worship. To the Inca, precious metals were the sweat and tears of the sun and moon, sacred substances reflecting divine power. Their temples glowed with sheets of hammered gold, catching the first light of dawn. The most important deity was Inti, the sun, whose warmth sustained life on the high plateau. Festivals celebrated his journey across the sky, reaffirming the bond between heaven and earth. Yet the Inca Empire was not eternal. In the 16th century, when Spanish conquistadors arrived, the empire was already strained by civil war between rival heirs to the throne. Francisco Pizarro and his men, with steel, horses, and guns, exploited these divisions, capturing Atahualpa, the Inca emperor, and demanding a ransom of rooms filled with gold. Even when the ransom was paid, Atahualpa was executed. The empire, vast and sophisticated, crumbled under the weight of conquest and disease. Within a generation, much of its structure was destroyed. But the stone walls remained, silent witnesses to a greatness that steel could not erase. Standing on the terraces of Machu Picchu at dawn, as mist rises from the valley below, you sense what the Inca achieved. They did not bend nature to their will so much as they worked with it, coaxing abundance from unforgiving heights. Their roads, their terraces, their temples show a philosophy of endurance, of balance, of seeing the world not as obstacle, but as partner. They built with patience, with vision, with a sense that their works should last as long as the mountains themselves. The Incas remind us that civilizations do not require all the tools we consider essential to achieve greatness. They remind us that creativity thrives under constraint, that genius is often born where the environment seems harshest. And they remind us, too, of fragility, that even the strongest walls, the longest roads, the most intricate systems can collapse under the weight of invasion, betrayal, and time. Yet their legacy lives on. Descendants of the Inca still farm the terraces, still speak Quechua, still honor the sun. Their bridges are still woven from grass each year, linking villages across rivers in traditions older than memory. The empire may have fallen, but the spirit endures, woven into the land itself. To stand in the Andes is to feel that spirit, to hear the echo of footsteps on stone roads, to imagine the chasqui racing with messages, the festivals of Cusco ablaze with color, the fields shimmering with maize under the sun. The Inca are gone, but their vision remains carved into mountains, a reminder that humanity's greatest works are not always those of conquest or machines, but those that learn to live in harmony with the earth. On the coastal plains of southern Peru, where the desert stretches flat and endless beneath a burning sky, strange figures sprawl across the earth, so vast they can only be seen from above. Lines cut through the barren soil, stretching for miles in straight paths. Geometric shapes, trapezoids, spirals, rectangles, unfurl across the sand. Most haunting of all are the geoglyphs, a hummingbird with wings outstretched, a spider with delicate legs, a monkey curling its long tail in a perfect spiral. These are the Nazca Lines, among the most enigmatic creations of the ancient world. To walk upon the desert floor is to see nothing more than shallow grooves carved into the earth, made by removing the reddish pebbles that cover the surface to reveal lighter soil beneath. But from the air, an altitude the Nazca themselves should never have reached, the patterns reveal themselves, intricate and deliberate. Some figures stretch over 600 feet, their proportions precise, their lines unwavering. Who made them, and why? The Nazca culture thrived here between 200 BCE and 600 CE, a society that survived in one of the harshest climates on Earth. They built aqueducts, known as puquios, spiraling wells that tapped underground water and carried it to their fields. They created pottery painted with vivid images of plants, animals, and deities. Their lives were bound to the desert, to the constant struggle for water and sustenance. And yet, amid this struggle, they carved their visions into the earth on a scale visible only to the sky. Some believe the lines were offerings to the gods, prayers etched into the desert for rain, fertility, survival. The figures of animals, hummingbirds, spiders, condors, may have been sacred symbols, each carrying meaning in the Nazca worldview. The straight lines, some running for miles, could have been ceremonial pathways, routes for processions where priests and pilgrims walked in ritual. Others see them as astronomical markers, aligning with the rising and setting of the sun, the moon and stars, a giant calendar inscribed in dust. There are more speculative ideas as well, because the figures can only be fully appreciated from above. Some have suggested that the Nazca possessed balloons or observation platforms, or that the lines were meant for beings who looked down from the sky. To believers in ancient astronaut theories, The Nazca Desert was a landing field, a message to extraterrestrials drawn across the earth. While most scholars caution against such leaps, the mystery remains compelling, for no single explanation has ever satisfied all the evidence. The desert itself has preserved the lines with uncanny care. With little rain, little wind, and little erosion, the figures have endured for centuries, fragile yet resilient. Walk among them, and you sense the silence of the desert pressing close, as if holding its secrets. The heat shimmers, the ground crunches underfoot, and the vastness of the drawings is impossible to grasp without leaving the earth entirely. Only when aircraft flew over the region in the 20th century did the true scale of the Nazca Lines become known to the wider world. What was once hidden in plain sight became one of archaeology's greatest enigmas. Picture the Nazca people at dusk, walking along one of the great lines, carrying offerings of food or textiles, chanting prayers to unseen gods. Picture them spiraling down into a Puccio well to bring up water, their survival dependent on knowledge of the hidden veins beneath the desert. Their lives were intimate with the land, and the land in turn became their canvas. The figures they left were not idle art. They were acts of devotion, inscribing their faith into the earth itself. And yet their society too fell. By the 7th century, environmental pressures, floods, droughts, shifting climate, may have undermined their survival. Fields turned barren, and the Nazca vanished, leaving behind only pottery, aqueducts, and the great lines. The desert remained, and with it the silent shapes, waiting for someone to wonder. To gaze upon the hummingbird geoglyph from above is to feel a strange connection. Here was a people who lived without modern technology, yet they created something so vast, so enduring, that it outlasts even their names. The lines whisper that human vision is not limited by circumstance, that even in hardship we reach for something greater, something eternal. The Nazca Lines are not only a riddle, they are a mirror. They remind us of our own desire to be seen, to leave messages that might endure beyond our lives, perhaps even beyond our species. Whether the lines were prayers, calendars, or signals, they carried meaning for those who made them, meaning strong enough to demand effort on a monumental scale. Today, as aircraft trace the sky and satellites map the earth, we finally see what the Nazca saw only in imagination. Their world inscribed upon the desert like scripture. The monkey curls its tail forever in the sand. The hummingbird hovers eternally with wings outstretched. The spider waits in silence, its legs etched against the barren earth. These figures remain, not answers but questions, reminding us that even in the emptiest landscapes, humanity inscribes wonder, leaving behind signs for the future to decipher. Between the rivers of the Tigris and Euphrates, where the fertile soil gave birth to the first great cities, a civilization rose that many called the cradle of human history. Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers, was where wandering tribes settled into permanent towns, where farming transformed into kingdoms, and where words were first pieced into clay to capture memory. To stand among the ruins of Ur or Babylon is to stand at the threshold of recorded time, where humanity took its first steps into history. The Sumerians were among the earliest to shape this land. Around 3000 BCE, they built cities with towering ziggurats, stepped temples rising towards the heavens. At Uruk, walls encircled a city said to have housed tens of thousands, a scale unimaginable before. And in these cities, for the first time, writing was born. Not carved pictures on cave walls, but wedge-shaped marks pressed into clay tablets. Cuneiform, the first script. What began as tallies of grain and trade grew into epics, prayers, laws. Through clay and stylus, the Sumerians ensured their voices would echo across millennia. One of those voices tells the story of Gilgamesh, a king who sought immortality. The Epic of Gilgamesh, written thousands of years before Homer's Odyssey, speaks of friendship, loss, and the longing for eternal life. In it, we glimpse the timeless concerns of humanity, how to face death, how to live meaningfully, how to make peace with our limits. The tale is myth, yet it carries truths as fresh as any modern story, reminding us that even at the dawn of civilization, people asked the same questions we do. Law, too, emerged here. The Code of Hammurabi, inscribed on a tall basalt stele, set forth rules that governed trade, property, marriage, punishment. Its principle was clear. Justice should be visible and predictable. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. The famous phrase was less about vengeance than about limits, ensuring that punishment matched crime. This was not merely custom, but written law, a foundation on which societies could be built. To see the stele today is to recognize the beginning of something we still live by. The idea that order rests on rules known to all. Mesopotamia's knowledge stretched beyond words and laws. Their astronomers charted the skies, dividing the year into 12 months, the day into hours. Their mathematics was based on 60, a system that still lingers in our 60 minutes, our 360 degrees of a circle. Their physicians wrote down treatments for wounds and illnesses, blending observation with ritual. In clay tablets, we find recipes for beer, instructions for irrigation, hymns to gods of storm and sun. Piece by piece, the elements of civilization as we know it took shape here. Not in theory, but in practice, carved into daily life. The land itself shaped their worldview. Between rivers that could nourish or destroy, the people saw life as a gift of fragile balance. Floods could sweep away crops, droughts could starve the land. In response, they built canals and dikes, controlling water with ingenuity, transforming desert into garden. Their ziggurats rose as mountains of brick, stairways for gods to descend, symbols of human devotion reaching skyward. Religion and science were not separate, but intertwined. Priest astronomers watched the stars not only to predict seasons, but to divine the will of heaven. Yet like all civilizations, Mesopotamia was not eternal. Cities rose and fell, empires conquered and collapsed. The Sumerians gave way to the Akkadians, the Babylonians, the Assyrians. Each left its mark: palaces with winged bulls, gardens said to hang like clouds, towers that touched the sky. But the rivers that nurtured life also carried silt that choked fields, and wars drained the strength of kingdoms. By the time Alexander the Great marched through Babylon, much of its glory was already memory. Still, the legacy of Mesopotamia remains in every word we write, every law we follow, every hour we count. It is in the very idea of history itself, the decision to mark events so that they would not be forgotten. Without the clay tablets pressed with cuneiform, the ancient world would be silent. With them, we hear voices across 5,000 years, scribes recording trades, kings declaring triumphs, poets singing of love and loss. The tablets are brittle, but the words endure, fragile bridges across time. Imagine walking through Ur under the rising sun, the air thick with the smell of baked clay, merchants calling in the markets, priests climbing the ziggurat stairs. Imagine a scribe sitting at a low table, stylus in hand, pressing marks into wet clay, recording a story that would outlast empires. That story survives today in museums and libraries, carried across centuries by accident and preservation. The hands that pressed those marks are dust, but their thoughts remain as vivid as when they were first inscribed. Mesopotamia is a reminder that civilization is both fragile and powerful. Fragile because it depends on rivers that can shift, on politics that can crumble. Powerful because ideas, once written, can survive when cities fall. In the cracked tablets of Sumer, in the laws of Hammurabi, in the myths of Gilgamesh, we find not strangers but kin, people who lived thousands of years ago yet thought in ways still familiar. They gave us the tools to remember, to build, to govern, and in doing so, they gave us ourselves. In the dusty plains of modern-day Pakistan and northwest India, beneath layers of earth long forgotten, archaeologists uncovered cities that rewrote the story of the ancient world. Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa, the great centers of the Indus Valley civilization, rose nearly 5,000 years ago and flourished for centuries. To gaze upon their ruins today is to step into a world both familiar and alien, a civilization that rivaled Egypt and Mesopotamia in scale and sophistication, yet left behind no monuments to kings, no pyramids for gods, no clear inscriptions of its rulers. It is a civilization wrapped in silence, yet its silence is full of meaning. The first impression is order. Streets run in straight lines, laid out in careful grids. Houses of baked brick line the avenues, each equipped with drainage systems, some with private baths. Wells dot the city, providing clean water to neighborhoods. Covered sewers run beneath the streets, carrying waste away. To stand among these ruins is to realize you are looking at one of the earliest examples of urban planning in human history. This was not a random sprawl of huts, but a designed city, its people living with a level of hygiene and organization that would not be matched in many parts of the world until thousands of years later. At the heart of Mohenjo-Daro lies the Great Bath, a massive pool built of brick and sealed with bitumen to hold water. Steps descend from all sides into the basin, suggesting ritual use, perhaps purification ceremonies. No grand temples or palaces dominate the cityscape, and this absence speaks volumes. Unlike Egypt with its pharaohs or Mesopotamia with its ziggurats, the Indus cities seem to reflect a different kind of society, less centered on divine kingship, more communal in structure. Power, if it existed in monarchs, left little trace. The architecture suggests a civilization focused not on rulers, but on people, on the shared rhythm of urban life. Their craftsmanship reveals a culture rich in artistry. Seals carved with images of animals and mysterious symbols have been found by the thousands. Some depict unicorn-like creatures, others show bulls, tigers, or composite beasts. These seals were likely used in trade, stamped on goods, marking ownership or origin. But the script engraved upon them remains undeciphered. Despite decades of effort, the Indus script refuses to yield its meaning. Without it, we cannot read their stories, their laws, their prayers. We are left with silent symbols, tantalizing glimpses of a language that could unlock an entire civilization. The Indus people were traders, their goods reaching Mesopotamia, their influence stretching across vast distances. Beads, pottery, cotton textiles, and lapis lazuli moved along their routes, linking them into the networks of the ancient world. Their weights and measures suggest a standardized system, evidence of economic organization. Yet what is striking is the lack of evidence for war. Few weapons have been found, and city walls seem more for flood protection than defense. This was not a culture obsessed with conquest, but with survival, trade, and ritual. And yet, like all great civilizations, it fell. Around 1900 BCE, the Indus cities began to decline. Some blame climate change, as the mighty Saraswati River dried and the monsoons shifted. Others suggest flooding or disease. Whatever the cause, the cities were abandoned. People dispersed into villages, the urban experiment fading into memory. Unlike Egypt or Mesopotamia, whose stories continued through texts and traditions, the Indus left no written chronicles we can read. Their language fell silent, their gods unnamed, their rulers forgotten. Only bricks, seals, and drains remain, whispering of lives once lived in remarkable order. To walk through Mohenjo-Daro today is to feel a strange kinship. The streets, though crumbled, are still streets. The houses, though roofless, still show courtyards, kitchens, wells. The drains, though broken, still trace their careful paths. These are things we recognize instantly, for they are the bones of urban life that still define us. Unlike colossal temples meant to awe, the Indus cities reflect the ordinary, yet profound. The desire for clean water, for organization, for community. Their greatness lies not in monuments to eternity, but in the rhythms of daily life made sustainable. And yet, the mystery gnaws. Who were these people? What did they call themselves? What gods did they worship? Were their leaders priestly councils, merchant elites, or hidden monarchs? Without their script, we can only guess. Some believe the seals represent a proto-Hindu culture with figures resembling Shiva, animals sacred even today. Others think the script may reveal a language unrelated to those around it, a unique voice erased by time. Until it is deciphered, the Indus Valley will remain an unfinished story. Picture a morning in Harappa, the sun rising over baked brick houses, smoke curling from hearths, children carrying water from wells. Merchants prepare goods for trade, women spin cotton into thread, priests perhaps perform rituals in the great bath. It is a city alive, ordered, purposeful, ordinary and extraordinary at once. And then picture its silence centuries later, streets empty, drains clogged with dust, houses abandoned. A civilization's heartbeat stilled, leaving only traces for strangers millennia later to uncover. The Indus Valley is a reminder that not all greatness shouts through pyramids or empires. Some greatness lies in quiet achievements, in plumbing, in planning, in equality. It shows us that civilization is not only about kings and conquests, but about how ordinary people live together, how they shape cities to sustain life. In the silence of Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa, we hear not the roar of empire, but the hum of community, a song interrupted but never entirely lost. In the steaming jungles of Cambodia, where the air hangs heavy with the scent of rain and earth, the ruins of Angkor rise like a dream. Towers shaped like lotus buds pierce the canopy. Carved walls stretch with endless bas-reliefs of gods and battles, and causeways cross moats wide as rivers. This was Angkor, the heart of the Khmer Empire, once the largest city on Earth. At its peak in the 12th century, Angkor was home to nearly 1 million people, a metropolis rivaling any in the medieval world. Today, Angkor Wat and its surrounding temples stand as stone skeletons, but in their silence they whisper of a civilization that mastered water, stone, and time. The genius of Angkor lay not only in its temples, but in its landscape. The Khmer built an immense hydraulic system, reservoirs, canals, embankments, that transformed the floodplain into a controlled environment. The Berais, vast artificial lakes, shimmered in the sun, storing water from the monsoon to be released in the dry season. Canals threaded through the city, irrigating fields, feeding crops of rice that sustained the empire. To see Angkor from above is to see geometry on a grand scale, a city designed not only for worship but for survival. It was a city of water as much as stone, a living machine in balance with the seasons. At its heart stood Angkor Wat, the largest religious monument in the world. Built by King Suryavarman II, it was dedicated to Vishnu, its towers rising like Mount Meru, the cosmic axis in Hindu cosmology. To walk its galleries is to trace stories etched in stone. Churning oceans of milk, armies of gods and demons, celestial dancers frozen mid-motion. At sunrise, the temple glows gold, its reflection mirrored in the moat, a vision so perfect it feels less like architecture than revelation. Nearby, Angkor Thom, the great walled city, was ruled by King Jayavarman VII, who filled it with temples, hospitals, and monuments. The Bayon, his state temple, greets visitors with giant faces carved in stone, serene and all-seeing, gazing outward in every direction. Their smiles are enigmatic, at once compassionate and commanding, guardians of a city meant to embody divine kingship. To walk beneath their gaze is to feel watched, not with judgment, but with timeless calm, as if the stones themselves breathe. Yet Angkor was not only about grandeur. In the shade of its temples, ordinary life unfolded. Markets bustled, boats glided along canals, children played in the shadow of towers. Farmers tended rice paddies that stretched to the horizon, their work tied directly to the waterworks that sustained the city. Monks chanted in cloisters, scribes recorded chronicles on palm leaves, artisans carved intricate reliefs that still astonish today. It was a city alive, beating with the rhythm of both sacred ritual and daily labor. But like many great civilizations, Angkor's brilliance carried within it seeds of fragility. Its water system, so complex, was vulnerable to change. In the 14th and 15th centuries, shifts in climate brought alternating floods and droughts that strained the delicate balance. Reservoirs silted, canals broke down, and the system faltered. At the same time, external pressures grew: conflict with neighboring states, shifting trade routes. By the time European travelers reached the region centuries later, Angkor had been largely abandoned, swallowed by jungle. What remained were stories of a lost city, its temples covered in vines, its grandeur hidden beneath roots and moss. The rediscovery of Angkor in the 19th century ignited wonder across the world. Photographs of tree roots wrapping towers like serpents became icons of mystery, a vision of nature reclaiming man's work. Yet even stripped by time, Angkor's essence endured. To stand before Angkor Wat at dawn is to understand why. The temple is more than stone. It is an idea. It embodies the human urge to connect earth with heaven, to shape cities not only as homes, but as reflections of the cosmos. Today, Angkor draws millions of visitors each year, its ruins alive again with footsteps and voices. Conservationists work to preserve its fragile carvings. Archaeologists uncover hidden structures with LiDAR scanning, revealing that the ancient city sprawled far wider than ever imagined. What was once thought to be a cluster of temples is now seen as a vast urban complex, perhaps the largest pre-industrial city the world has known. Its scale and sophistication continue to challenge assumptions about what ancient societies could achieve. Angkor is not merely a relic, it is a reminder. It reminds us that civilizations thrive when they learn to live with their environment, but also that they falter when balance is lost. It shows us that human ambition can carve beauty from stone and weave order from water, but that time and climate can undo even the mightiest works. And it whispers that memory itself is fragile, for Angkor was never truly lost. It was always known to locals. But to the wider world, it vanished. Proof that greatness can slip from global memory until chance brings it back. To walk its ruins today, under the gaze of the stone faces of Bayon or the towering spires of Angkor Wat, is to feel both awe and humility. Here was a people who built not for a decade or a century, but for eternity, yet eternity proved elusive. Their city became silent, their canals dry, their towers overtaken by trees, and yet in that silence, beauty endured. Angkor remains, half ruin, half revelation, a city where water and stone conspired to create something larger than life, something that still speaks to us across the centuries. Across the wide valleys of the Yellow River and the Yangtze, where mist drapes over mountains like veils of silk, a civilization took root that would endure for thousands of years. Ancient China was not merely one dynasty or city, but a continuous flow of culture, invention, and philosophy that shaped the rhythm of life for countless generations. To explore it is to enter a world where the practical and the spiritual intertwined, where daily survival sparked innovation, and where ideas carved into bamboo and silk still echo today. Consider first the gifts of invention. From China came paper, that most humble and transformative creation, turning fleeting words into lasting memory. With paper, knowledge multiplied, carried across kingdoms, preserved for centuries. From China, too, came the compass, guiding sailors across unknown seas, and gunpowder, a substance that began as a pursuit of immortality by alchemists, but reshaped the world as a tool of war. Printing, both woodblock and movable type, allowed texts to spread like wildfire, democratizing wisdom long before Europe's Gutenberg. These were not isolated accidents, but the result of a culture that valued experimentation, that sought harmony between man and nature, yet did not shy from harnessing nature's power. But invention alone does not explain China's longevity. Beneath the material lay philosophy, a foundation of thought that guided rulers and commoners alike. Confucius, in the 6th century BCE, taught of order and duty, of the need for respect between ruler and subject, parent and child, husband and wife. His Analects became a moral compass, shaping governments and households for centuries. At the same time, Taoist sages spoke of balance, of yielding like water, of living in tune with the Tao, the way that flows through all things. Between these currents, Chinese civilization found a rhythm, the structure of Confucian order, the fluidity of Taoist wisdom. The Chinese also mastered the art of medicine, not as science in the modern sense, but as a philosophy of balance. The body was seen as a landscape of energies, yin and yang, harmonies and disharmonies. Acupuncture, herbal remedies, practices of qigong and tai chi. These were not just treatments, but ways of aligning human life with the cosmos. To read the Yellow Emperor's inner canon is to see a worldview in which health is not simply the absence of disease, but the presence of harmony. A lesson that still resonates in holistic medicine today. Their architecture reflected the same principles. Wooden palaces, tiled roofs curving upward as if to invite heaven, gardens designed as miniature universes with rocks as mountains, ponds as seas, pavilions as places of contemplation. The Great Wall, stretching across deserts and mountains, symbolized defense. Yes, but also determination, the will of a people to hold fast against chaos. It was not built at once, but layer upon layer across centuries, a physical embodiment of persistence. To stand upon it today, wind whipping across its stones, is to feel the weight of time pressing from both past and future. China's dynasties rose and fell, but each carried forward the thread of culture. The Zhou, with their mandate of heaven, proclaiming rulers legitimate only if they governed justly. The Han, whose empire spread knowledge along the Silk Road, trading silk and ideas from east to west. The Tang, a golden age of poetry and cosmopolitan exchange, where Buddhist monks brought scriptures from India and Persian traders filled the markets of Chang'an. The Song, masters of art and technology, where landscapes painted in ink revealed a philosophy of seeing the world as both vast and intimate. What is remarkable is not only what China invented, but how it remembered. Dynasties collapsed, invaders stormed, yet the core ideas remained, passed down through classics, through ritual, through the continuity of language and script. A poem written 2,000 years ago can still be read today, its characters unchanged, its emotions still alive. Few civilizations can claim such unbroken memory. And yet, like all great societies, China wrestled with fragility. Floods of the Yellow River earned it the name China's Sorrow, drowning fields, washing away villages. Famine, corruption, rebellion, these shadows haunted each dynasty. But even collapse became a cycle of renewal, for in the Chinese worldview, endings were beginnings, dynasties following the rhythm of rise and fall, like the turning of the seasons. The continuity itself became the greatest monument, not carved in stone, but in thought. To imagine ancient China, picture a scholar bending over bamboo strips, brush in hand, copying texts by lamplight. Picture a farmer guiding oxen through rice paddies, water glimmering in the sun, irrigation channels branching like veins. Picture a Taoist hermit on a mountain peak, watching clouds drift, composing lines of poetry that speak to eternity. Picture the clang of blacksmiths forging bells for rituals, the smoke of incense rising from temple altars, the laughter of children chasing kites through fields. This was not one world, but many woven together, sustained by balance, discipline, and imagination. China teaches us that civilization is not only measured by monuments of stone, but by the endurance of ideas. Its wall may crumble, its palaces may burn, but the thought of harmony, of order, of the Tao, continues to flow. It shows us that invention, when rooted in vision, can change the course of humanity, and that philosophy, when lived daily, can bind a people across millennia. To walk through the Forbidden City in Beijing, or among the ancient tombs of Xi'an is to feel the continuity of that vision. It is to understand that time itself bends in China, stretching back unbroken, carrying us into the present. And as the sun sets over rice fields, casting golden light across water and stone, you realize that this civilization was never only about power or conquest. It was about balance between earth and sky, man and nature, tradition and change. That balance is its true legacy, one that still whispers to us across the centuries. On the rocky shores of the Aegean, where olive trees cling to the hillsides and the sea shimmers with restless light, a people emerged whose ideas would shape the world for millennia. Ancient Greece was not a single kingdom, but a collection of city-states, each fiercely independent, yet together they forged a legacy of thought, art, and inquiry that still pulses through our lives today. Their temples stand in ruins, their statues weathered, but their words remain alive, carried in philosophy, mathematics, drama, and democracy itself. The Greeks were seekers. They sought to understand not only how to live, but why life is as it is. In Athens, a man named Socrates walked the streets, asking questions that unsettled his fellow citizens. What is justice? What is virtue? How should one live? He claimed to know nothing, yet through questions he led others to confront their own ignorance. For his persistence, he was condemned to death, but his method, the relentless search for truth through dialogue, became the seed of Western philosophy. His student Plato built upon this, founding an academy where ideas were treated as realities more enduring than stone. To him, the visible world was but a shadow of higher forms, and the philosopher's task was to grasp the eternal. Aristotle, Plato's student, turned his gaze outward, cataloging the natural world, classifying plants and animals, developing logic, ethics, and political theory. Between them, they shaped the very framework of thought that still guides us. But philosophy was only one thread. The Greeks gazed at the stars with curiosity, charting their motions, imagining the cosmos as an ordered system. Pythagoras explored numbers as the language of reality, seeing harmony in ratios and geometry. Euclid codified the rules of mathematics so clearly that his Elements remained the standard textbook for 2,000 years. Archimedes, in Sicily, played with levers, pulleys, and water, discovering principles of physics that underpin engineering today. To them, knowledge was not separate from wonder. It was a way of participating in the beauty of the universe. Their creativity spilled into the arts. In the theaters carved into hillsides, audiences gathered to watch tragedies and comedies unfold under the open sky. Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides explored themes of fate, pride, and divine justice. Aristophanes filled the stage with biting humor, mocking politics and society with fearless wit. These plays were more than entertainment. They were mirrors held up to the human condition, probing questions of choice and destiny, laughter and sorrow. Democracy, too, found its first breath in Greece. In Athens, free male citizens gathered in assemblies, debating laws, voting on war and peace. It was imperfect, excluding women, slaves, and foreigners, yet it was radical, a society daring to let ordinary voices shape collective destiny. The idea spread across centuries, inspiring revolutions and constitutions far beyond Greece's shores. The Greeks built with stone, but always with an eye for proportion and beauty. The Parthenon, rising on the Acropolis, embodies harmony, its columns tilted with subtle precision so that the structure appears perfect to the human eye. Statues of gods and athletes captured the human form with grace and vitality, celebrating both divine majesty and mortal strength. In marble and bronze, they expressed a belief that humanity itself was worthy of reverence. Yet Greece was no utopia. Wars raged between city-states, most famously the Peloponnesian War between Athens and Sparta. Plagues swept through cities, famine struck, empires rose and fell. The brilliance of Athens dimmed under defeat, and eventually Alexander the Great swept from Macedonia, forging an empire that stretched from Greece to India. His conquests spread Greek culture across continents, blending it with Persian, Egyptian, and Indian traditions. This Hellenistic world carried Greek ideas far beyond their homeland, ensuring their survival even as political independence waned. To imagine life in ancient Greece, picture an Athenian marketplace, the agora, buzzing with merchants and philosophers alike. Picture ships sailing from harbors, carrying olive oil and wine to distant lands. Picture young men training in gymnasiums, their bodies honed as much as their minds. Picture a chorus singing in the theater, voices rising with the setting sun. It was a world both ordinary and extraordinary, where daily life intertwined with pursuit of the eternal. The legacy of Greece is not in its power. Its empires faded, its cities crumbled, but in its questions. What is justice? What is beauty? What is truth? These questions remain alive, passed from teacher to student, from book to book, from mind to mind. Greece reminds us that civilization is more than monuments or armies. It is the search for meaning, the courage to think freely, the conviction that human reason can touch the infinite. Stand on the Acropolis at dusk, the Parthenon glowing in golden light, the city sprawling below. The cicadas sing, the air is warm, and the stones beneath your feet are worn by countless footsteps. In that moment, you feel the presence of those who came before: Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, poets, mathematicians, artists. Their voices still echo, their questions still stir. The ruins are silent, but the ideas remain vibrant, flowing through time like the Aegean Sea itself, never still, always alive. Along the banks of the Tiber River, in a city that began as a cluster of huts on 7 hills, an empire grew that would one day stretch from the deserts of Africa to the forests of Britain, from the Atlantic coast of Spain to the rivers of Mesopotamia. Rome was not built in a day, as the proverb says, but across centuries of conquest, lawmaking, and construction. What began as a small republic expanded into one of the greatest empires the world has ever known, leaving behind monuments, laws, and ideas that still shape our lives. Rome's genius was practical. Where the Greeks pursued philosophy and art, the Romans sought order and utility. They mastered the art of building not only for beauty, but for endurance. Their roads, paved with stone and crowned for drainage, stretched more than 50,000 miles, binding together the vast reaches of the empire. All roads lead to Rome was more than a saying. It was reality. Legions marched on these roads. Merchants carried goods. Messengers delivered news. The roads were the arteries of an empire, pumping life into distant provinces. Aqueducts brought water into cities, some spanning miles across valleys on arches that still stand today. In Rome itself, fountains gushed, baths steamed, households drank from a supply cleaner and more reliable than many enjoy in the modern world. The Cloaca Maxima, the great sewer, drained the marshes and carried waste away, a marvel of engineering that kept the city habitable for centuries. To walk along the remnants of an aqueduct, arches rising against the sky, is to glimpse the practicality of Roman vision, a society that believed in solving problems with stone and mortar. Their architecture reached for grandeur as well as function. The Colosseum, an arena that could hold 50,000 spectators, hosted gladiatorial games, mock naval battles, and spectacles of blood and theater. The Pantheon, with its perfect dome and oculus open to the sky, remains one of the most extraordinary buildings ever made, its concrete vault unchallenged in scale for more than 1,000 years. Roman concrete itself was an invention that defied time, a mixture that hardened even underwater and grew stronger with age. It was this material that allowed them to build harbors, bridges, amphitheaters, and temples that still endure, silent witnesses to their ambition. But Rome's true legacy may lie not in stone, but in law. The Romans codified rules that governed contracts, property, citizenship, and crime. The 12 Tables, the Justinian Code, the concept that laws should apply universally and be written for all to see. These principles undergird legal systems across the world today. They introduced the idea of legal precedent, of rights and responsibilities, of citizens protected by law rather than by the whims of rulers. Even as emperors rose to near-divine power, the idea of law as something greater than any one man endured. Their government, too, left echoes. The Roman Republic experimented with checks and balances, with senates and assemblies, with magistrates whose power was limited by time. Though it eventually collapsed into empire, the model of a republic inspired generations long after. The founders of the United States, drafting their Constitution, looked directly to Rome for guidance, borrowing terms like Senate and Capitol, seeing themselves as heirs of Roman civic virtue. Yet Rome was not only order and progress, it was also conquest and brutality. Legions subdued vast territories, enslaving populations, crushing revolts with ruthless efficiency. Gladiatorial games entertained crowds with violence, human lives reduced to spectacle. Political intrigues filled the forums, assassinations and betrayals deciding the fate of the state. Rome was a paradox, capable of law yet prone to tyranny, capable of beauty yet reveling in cruelty, capable of endurance yet vulnerable to decay. The empire's decline was slow, stretched across centuries. Economic strain, corruption, invasions from Germanic tribes all chipped away at its power. In 476 CE, the Western Empire fell, its last emperor dethroned. But Rome did not truly vanish. Its laws lived on in Europe, its roads remained in use, its language evolved into Italian, French, Spanish, Portuguese, Romanian. The eastern half, Byzantium, carried Roman traditions for another 1,000 years. And in the imagination of the world, Rome never died. It became the standard against which all empires are measured. To walk today among the ruins of the Forum is to feel the layers of history pressing close. Columns rise against the sky, arches stand where generals once paraded, stones are worn by centuries of footsteps. In those ruins, you sense both the grandeur and the fragility of Rome. Here was a civilization that believed it could last forever, that built as if eternity were its inheritance. And in a way, it succeeded, not through empire, but through influence. Rome's story is one of ambition and caution. It teaches that power without limits corrodes, but also that vision grounded in practicality endures. Its aqueducts still flow, its concrete still holds, its laws still shape nations. It reminds us that civilization is not only what we build, but what we imagine to be just, what we agree to live by together. Rome fell, but the idea of Rome remains, carved into our roads, our laws, our language. Stand in the Colosseum at dawn, when the crowds are gone, and silence fills the arches. Light streams through the broken walls, birds wheel above, and the arena floor lies empty. You feel the echo of centuries, the roar of the crowd, the clash of gladiators, the speeches of emperors, the debates of senators. Rome is not gone. It lives in memory, in stone, in the structure of the world we inhabit. Its empire has fallen, but its spirit remains the architecture of our own civilization. Long before satellites mapped the globe or compasses pointed north, humans set sail into the unknown, guided only by stars, winds, and instinct. Across oceans and seas, ancient mariners learned to read the rhythms of nature, to trust the swell of waves and the flight of birds. Their vessels were made of wood and rope, fragile against the vastness of the sea. Yet with them they reached distant lands, connecting continents long before history books acknowledged their journeys. To explore ancient navigation is to see humanity at its most daring, stepping beyond sight of land, trusting that knowledge, memory, and courage would be enough. The Phoenicians, masters of the Mediterranean, built sleek ships that carried cedar, glass, and purple dye to every corner of the sea. They founded colonies as far west as Carthage, perhaps even beyond the Pillars of Hercules into the Atlantic. Legends suggest they circumnavigated Africa, guided by the rising and setting sun, their sails filled by winds few others dared to trust. For them, the sea was not a barrier, but a road, each wave a path to trade and discovery. Farther east, Polynesian voyagers crossed distances that stagger the imagination. In double-hulled canoes, they traveled thousands of miles across the Pacific, from Tahiti to Hawaii, from Samoa to New Zealand, from tiny atolls to islands barely visible on the horizon. They carried no maps, no written guides. Instead, they memorized the rising and setting points of stars, the feel of swells beneath the hull, the flight patterns of seabirds returning to land. Their knowledge was embodied, passed orally from navigator to apprentice, a living library of the ocean. With this, they peopled the most remote islands on Earth, proving that the Pacific wasn't empty, but a highway of waves. The Greeks, too, were skilled mariners. They charted coastlines, mapped stars, and built triremes that sliced through the Aegean and beyond. Ptolemy's maps would guide explorers for centuries, imperfect but ambitious, reflecting a world view in which the Earth could be measured, bounded, known. The Greeks, and later the Romans, sailed their empires into being, carrying armies and goods across the Mediterranean, binding cultures together with roots of salt, olive oil, and wine. In the Indian Ocean, trade winds carried merchants from the coasts of Africa to India and Southeast Asia. Arab sailors mastered these winds, timing their voyages to the monsoon, establishing routes that carried spices, gold, ivory, and ideas. Dhows with their triangular sails became the vehicles of exchange, connecting Zanzibar to Gujarat, Oman to Java. In these waters, navigation was as much about patience as daring, waiting for the right season, then trusting the sky to carry you home. Even in the Americas, seafaring played a role in connecting civilizations. The Maya built canoes that plied rivers and coastlines, carrying cacao, obsidian, and jade. And though the full extent of pre-Columbian navigation remains debated, artifacts suggest that people of the Americas understood the sea not as an impassable void, but as a space of possibility. What all these mariners shared was a way of seeing the world. They looked up, not down. They saw the night sky not as decoration, but as a map, the stars guiding them with unfailing clarity. They listened to the ocean, noting subtle shifts in swell, changes in color that revealed shallow reefs, the cries of birds signaling land. Navigation was not just technique, but art. A dialogue with the natural world, a relationship built on respect and observation. Imagine a Polynesian navigator lying in his canoe at night, eyes fixed on the heavens, feeling the rhythm of waves against the hull. He senses a change in the pattern, a cross swell from another direction. He knows land lies that way, though it is still invisible. He guides his canoe toward it, confident, carrying the memory of countless voyages. Imagine a Phoenician sailor watching the sun sink into the horizon, steering by its light, knowing that tomorrow it will rise in the opposite direction, confirming his course. These are acts of courage, but also acts of knowledge, born of generations observing the world with care. Navigation was more than survival. It was civilization. With it came trade, the exchange of goods and ideas, the mingling of cultures. Without it, isolated societies remained small. With it, the world became connected, a tapestry of routes binding people together across oceans. The Silk Road may be famous, but it was the sea roads that carried as much, if not more, of the ancient world's lifeblood. And yet, the sea remained a place of danger. Storms could scatter fleets, reefs could tear hulls, currents could drag ships into oblivion. Myths rose from these dangers, sirens luring sailors to their doom, sea monsters lurking in the depths, gods controlling winds and waves. The ocean was alive with mystery, and to navigate it was to enter into dialogue with forces beyond human control. Perhaps that is why seafaring is so often wrapped in legend, because each voyage was both real and mythic, a test of knowledge and faith. Today, we cross oceans in hours, guided by satellites, engines, and charts. But in the echoes of ancient navigation, we find something profound, a reminder that humanity has always reached beyond the visible, has always trusted knowledge to carry us into the unknown. The sailors of old did not wait for certainty. They sailed with courage, carrying their civilizations across waves that seemed endless, guided by stars that still shine overhead. The sea remembers them, the stars remember them, and in our maps, in our ships, in our restless urge to explore, we remember them too. In the dim glow of ancient workshops, where smoke curled from braziers and strange symbols were etched onto parchment, seekers bent over flasks and furnaces, chasing secrets hidden in the fabric of matter itself. They were the alchemists, men and women who believed that nature concealed mysteries waiting to be unlocked, that base metals might become gold, that sickness might be healed by a single elixir, that mortality itself might be overcome. To some they were dreamers, to others deceivers, yet in their pursuit of the impossible they laid foundations that would one day become science. Alchemy was born from a world view in which the universe was alive. Earth, water, air, and fire were not merely substances, but principles, each carrying a balance of forces. To combine them was to participate in creation itself, to mirror the work of the cosmos. In Egypt, in Greece, in China, in the Islamic world, alchemy took shape as both philosophy and practice. The tools of the alchemist, retorts, crucibles, furnaces, looked like instruments of magic, but they were also instruments of experiment, precursors of the laboratory. One of the greatest dreams of alchemy was transmutation, the transformation of lead or other base metals into gold. Gold was not only wealth, but symbol, incorruptible, radiant, eternal. To produce it was to master nature's hidden processes, to turn the imperfect into the perfect. Stories tell of alchemists who claimed success, who dazzled patrons with demonstrations, who lived on the edge of science and deception. But whether or not they ever succeeded, the attempt itself mattered. It drove them to study matter closely, to experiment with heat, with mixtures, with processes that hinted at chemistry long before the word existed. Another dream was the philosopher's stone, a legendary substance said to grant both transmutation and eternal life. To possess it was to hold the key to immortality, to overcome the decay of the body and the corruption of metals alike. The search for the stone carried alchemy deep into mysticism, blending with spiritual quests, prayers, meditations. In China, Taoist alchemists pursued elixirs of immortality, mixing herbs and minerals, sometimes with tragic results, as mercury and arsenic brought death instead of life. Yet even in failure, they advanced the understanding of minerals, medicine, and the human body. In the Islamic Golden Age, alchemy flourished. Scholars like Jabir ibn Hayyan wrote volumes on substances and processes, distinguishing acids, refining distillation, experimenting with compounds. They saw alchemy not only as a mystical pursuit, but as a structured inquiry into nature, a science of balance and transformation. Their works traveled into Europe, translated into Latin, inspiring generations of seekers. The very word alchemy comes from Arabic, alchimia, rooted in the earlier Egyptian word for the black land, the fertile soil along the Nile. From one culture to another, the pursuit continued, always shifting, always reimagined. In medieval Europe, alchemy became both respected and ridiculed. Kings and nobles hired alchemists, hoping to fill their treasuries with gold. Churches condemned the practice as heresy or sorcery. Yet within monasteries, monks quietly preserved alchemical texts, blending them with theology. The images of alchemy, dragons devouring their tails, kings and queens dissolving and reuniting, suns and moons in mystical embrace, were allegories as much as recipes, expressions of the inner transformation sought by the alchemist's soul. To transform lead into gold was not only to alter matter, but to refine the spirit, to turn ignorance into wisdom, mortality into eternity. And through it all, discoveries accumulated. Distillation led to stronger spirits, perfumes and medicines. Experiments with pigments created new colors for art. Processes of refining metals and acids prepared the ground for metallurgy and chemistry. Alchemy was never pure science, but without its mixture of dream and discipline, modern science might never have emerged. Imagine an alchemist at work. In a small chamber lit by flickering oil lamps, glass vessels bubble, smoke rises from furnaces, strange odors fill the air. The alchemist studies the changing colors, listens for subtle sounds, records observations in coded notes only initiates can read. Around him hang diagrams of circles within circles, symbols of sun, moon, and planets, each representing metals, each tied to cosmic forces. He is part scientist, part priest, part artist. His quest is not only for gold, but for meaning, for a glimpse of the unity behind the diversity of the world. To us, alchemy may seem misguided, its promises unfulfilled. No philosopher's stone has been found, no elixir of immortality proven. Yet to dismiss it entirely is to forget that progress is often born from dreams. Alchemy was humanity's bridge between myth and science, between the magical worldview of the ancients and the empirical method of the modern age. In their furnaces burned the first sparks of chemistry. In their symbols lived the enduring hunger to make sense of the universe. Today, when we split atoms, when we study DNA, when we transform energy into matter and matter into energy, we are heirs of that hunger. We may smile at the alchemist's ambitions, but in truth we pursue the same dream: to understand, to transform, to transcend. Alchemy reminds us that the line between science and mysticism is not as sharp as we think, that curiosity, wonder, and imagination are as important as reason. The alchemists did not find immortality, but they left something that endures: the spirit of inquiry, the belief that nature conceals secrets worth seeking, the courage to experiment in the face of doubt. Their furnaces are cold, their manuscripts faded, but their influence remains, hidden in the laboratories of modern science, in the medicines we take, in the technologies we wield. To peer into their world is to see ourselves reflected. Creatures forever chasing the hidden, forever mixing knowledge with hope, forever seeking the gold that lies not only in the earth, but in the heart. On the shores of the Mediterranean, where the Nile spills into the sea, there once stood a city that dreamed of gathering all the wisdom of the world. Alexandria, founded by Alexander the Great and ruled by the Ptolemies of Egypt, became a beacon of learning. At its heart rose the Great Library, a place so legendary that even in ruin, it has become a symbol of humanity's greatest hope and greatest loss. To speak of the Library of Alexandria is to speak of a vision, that knowledge itself could be collected, preserved, and made eternal. The library was said to hold hundreds of thousands of scrolls, works gathered from every land touched by trade and conquest. Ships arriving in Alexandria were rumored to have their manuscripts seized, copied by scribes, the originals stored in the library's shelves. Texts from Greece, Egypt, Mesopotamia, India, and beyond may have rested side by side, treatises on medicine, astronomy, history, mathematics, philosophy. Imagine what secrets lay in those scrolls: maps of lands unknown, accounts of vanished civilizations, discoveries of science that might have leapt centuries forward if preserved. The scholars of the library pursued knowledge with fervor. Eratosthenes measured the circumference of the earth with remarkable accuracy by studying shadows at different latitudes. Aristarchus proposed that the earth orbited the sun, a heliocentric vision lost for centuries before Copernicus revived it. Hero of Alexandria experimented with steam engines, toys perhaps, but glimpses of technologies far ahead of their time. The library was not simply storage. It was a crucible of thought where minds met and ideas fused. And then it was gone. The accounts of its destruction are murky, wrapped in legend and contradiction. Some say Julius Caesar's siege of Alexandria in 48 BCE sparked a fire that consumed part of the collection. Others blame later emperors, or Christian zealots who saw pagan texts as heresy, or Muslim conquerors who believed the Quran sufficient for all knowledge. Perhaps the truth is not one catastrophe, but many, each wave of neglect and violence chipping away until nothing remained. By the time centuries had passed, the library had vanished, leaving only memory and myth. The loss haunts us. We imagine what was destroyed, works of ancient science, histories of forgotten nations, philosophies that might have changed our world. What if the heliocentric theory had not been lost? What if medical knowledge had advanced centuries earlier? What if records of vanished civilizations, Atlantis perhaps, or cultures erased by flood, had been preserved? The silence left by the library is vast, a void that reminds us how fragile knowledge can be. Yet even in its absence, the Library of Alexandria endures as symbol. It embodies humanity's longing to gather wisdom, to keep it safe against time and chaos. Every library built since then carries a trace of that dream, every archive, every digital database. We still chase the vision of Alexandria, a place where the world's knowledge is united, accessible, eternal. The dream survives even though the building is gone. To imagine walking its halls is to ache with wonder. Picture rows upon rows of papyrus scrolls, the air scented with ink and dust, scholars murmuring in Greek and Egyptian, Indian and Hebrew. Picture the hum of thought as ideas crossed languages and cultures, each scroll a thread in a vast tapestry of understanding. In those halls, humanity glimpsed what it might mean to know itself fully, to hold memory against oblivion. The fall of the library is not only a story of the past, it is a warning. Knowledge is fragile. It can be burned, neglected, forgotten. Even today, archives can vanish in seconds, data lost, books destroyed by war, languages erased by silence. The library teaches us that preservation is not passive, but active, that memory must be guarded if it is to endure. And yet, perhaps the true legacy of the library is not what was lost, but what it inspired. It has become myth, yes, but myths guide us. It calls us to rebuild, to preserve, to dream of a world where knowledge cannot be destroyed. It whispers that though scrolls burn, the pursuit of wisdom cannot be extinguished. The Library of Alexandria died, but in its death it became immortal, a symbol carried forward by every seeker of truth. Stand on the modern shoreline of Alexandria, the waves breaking against the harbor, the sun sinking into the sea. Somewhere beneath your feet once stood the halls where Eratosthenes measured the earth, where scholars debated the stars. Nothing remains but echoes. And yet, as the water glimmers with fading light, you feel the presence of that dream, that all knowledge might be gathered, that all questions might be asked, that no secret of the world is beyond reach. The library is gone. The idea is not. Again and again, across the long corridors of time, civilizations have risen in brilliance only to fall into silence. Their temples crumble, their cities vanish beneath jungles or sand, their languages turn to dust on forgotten tongues. Sometimes the fall comes slowly, through famine, war, or neglect. Other times it comes suddenly, with the roar of the earth, the fury of the sea, or the fire of the sky. Nature has always been both cradle and executioner, nurturing human ambition, and then, without warning, sweeping it away. To look at history is to see not only our triumphs, but the fragility of our place within the cycles of the world. Consider the eruption of Thera, the volcanic island of Santorini, around 1600 BCE. Its explosion was one of the most violent in human history, sending waves across the Aegean, burying towns beneath ash, darkening skies for months. Some believe this disaster shattered the Minoan civilization, once masters of Crete, whose frescoes of dolphins and palaces of labyrinthine halls hint at a culture radiant with art and trade. In a single cataclysm, much of it was erased, its memory echoing perhaps in the legend of Atlantis. Far to the west, around 536 CE, a veil of dust covered the world. Chroniclers wrote of the sun darkened, crops failing, famine spreading across continents. Modern science points to massive volcanic eruptions, their ash dimming the skies, plunging humanity into a year without summer. Empires weakened, societies staggered. The Byzantines faltered, kingdoms shrank, hunger stalked millions. Nature had reminded humanity that all plans rest upon fragile ground. In the Americas, earthquakes and droughts played their role in the collapse of mighty cultures. The Maya, masters of astronomy and architecture, saw their cities abandoned as rainfall dwindled and wars grew fiercer. Terraces cracked, reservoirs dried, the jungle reclaimed plazas once filled with chants and drums. The Nazca Lines lay silent in the desert long after their makers vanished. Civilizations that had charted the stars and built monuments of stone could not outlast the withering of rain. The sea, too, has claimed its share. Entire coastlines once settled are now drowned beneath rising waters. Off the coasts of India, Japan, and even Britain, divers find traces of structures swallowed by the ocean, memories of lands lost when ice melted and seas surged. The great flood myths told in dozens of cultures, from Mesopotamia to the Bible to the legends of native peoples, may all echo memories of rising waters at the end of the Ice Age, when vast stretches of human settlement were erased. The ocean has no pity. What it takes, it buries in silence. And above all, the sky. Meteors have scarred the earth, leaving craters vast and deep. The Tunguska event of 1908 flattened forests in Siberia, sparing humanity by chance of geography. But in the deeper past, asteroids reshaped life itself. The Chicxulub impact 65 million years ago, ending the reign of dinosaurs, clearing the path for mammals and eventually us. We live beneath the same sky, vulnerable to the same cosmic forces. Civilization may rise high, but it cannot command the heavens. Yet in this fragility lies meaning. Civilizations fall, but humanity endures. Each collapse leaves not emptiness, but fragments, stone walls, broken pots, faint inscriptions. From these, later generations rebuild, remember, and reimagine. The loss of the Library of Alexandria did not end the pursuit of knowledge. It made us hunger for preservation all the more. The fall of Rome did not extinguish law. Its principles lived on in new nations. Even when floods, fires, or quakes erase cities, memory remains in stories. Myths, whispers passed down until someone dares to dig again. Perhaps this is why we are drawn to ruins. To walk among them is to feel both the weight of destruction and the resilience of survival. The broken columns of Greece, the shattered temples of Angkor, the silent plazas of Tikal. They remind us that nothing lasts forever, but also that what is lost can still speak. The stones may not answer, but they do not forget. And so the great lesson of nature's cycles is not despair, but humility. We are not the masters of the earth. We are participants in its rhythms. Our cities may gleam, our machines may fly, our networks may stretch around the globe. But like the Minoans, the Maya, the Romans, we live at the mercy of fire, water, wind, and sky. The challenge is not to escape these forces, but to live with them wisely, to remember that greatness lies not only in building, but in balance. Imagine the future archaeologist, thousands of years from now, uncovering the ruins of our own civilization. Skyscrapers fallen, satellites silent, plastics fossilized in stone. What story will they tell? Will they see us as wise, reckless, arrogant, visionary? Will they marvel at our knowledge or shake their heads at our hubris? The cycles of history suggest that one day our monuments too will be ruins. The question is what legacy will endure, what fragments we will leave for them to piece together. As we close this journey through lost civilizations, one truth remains. We are part of the same story. We walk the same earth, beneath the same stars, across the same seas. We inherit the brilliance and the mistakes of those who came before. Their ruins are our warnings, their dreams our inheritance. If history teaches anything, it is that nothing is permanent except change, and that wisdom lies in remembering that truth. Stand on a cliff at twilight, waves breaking below, wind carrying the scent of salt and stone. The sun dips, the sky turns crimson, the earth breathes. In that moment you feel the fragility of all human endeavor, and yet also its beauty. Civilizations rise, civilizations fall, but the human spirit continues, seeking, building, remembering, dreaming. That is our true legacy, the thread that endures through every cycle of destruction and renewal.